The woman's screams had been echoing across Samuel Hawthorne's land for 3 days now. He'd found her Tuesday morning, collapsed against his well, clutching a bundle of cloth so tight her knuckles had gone bone white. Blood soaked through her torn dress, mixing dirt and desperation into something that made his stomach turn. But it wasn't the blood that made him hesitate before approaching. It was the way she kept looking over her shoulder, like death itself was riding hard behind her. "Please," she'd whispered when he knelt beside her. "It's burning me alive." Her fever-bright eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that made him step back. "Don't let them take it. Promise me." Samuel had built his ranch in the shadow of Devil's Ridge for a reason. 20 miles from the nearest town, 40 from the nearest lawman. It was the kind of place where a man could disappear his past and start fresh. He'd done exactly that after the war, trading his Confederate gray for rancher's leather, burying memories deeper than any grave. The last thing he needed was someone else's trouble bleeding onto his land. But something in her voice, raw, desperate, maternal, had made him lift her anyway. Now, she lay in his spare room, fever dreams making her thrash against his grandmother's quilt. The bundle never left her arms. Whatever was wrapped in that cloth, she protected it like her own life depended on it. Maybe it did. Samuel stood in his doorway, watching her sleep fitfully in the amber light of his oil lamp. 3 days of caring for a stranger, and he still didn't know her name. Didn't know what she was running from, or why every horse that passed on the distant road made her bolt upright, wild-eyed and reaching for something that wasn't there. The smart thing would be to load her onto his wagon and take her to town. Let Doc Mitchell deal with the fever. Let Sheriff Barnes sort out whatever trouble followed in her wake. Samuel had learned long ago that mercy was a luxury most men couldn't afford. But as he turned to leave, she stirred. Her grip loosened on the bundle for just a moment, and a corner of the cloth fell away. What he saw in that sliver of exposed fabric made his blood run cold. Samuel's hands trembled as he stepped closer to the bed. The woman's breathing had settled into the shallow rhythm of deep fever sleep, but her arms still formed a protective cage around whatever she carried. That glimpse of blue fabric, Union blue, had triggered memories he'd spent 5 years trying to bury. He reached out, then stopped. A decent man would let her be, would respect her privacy, but Samuel Hawthorne had stopped being a decent man the day he'd walked away from Gettysburg, leaving his younger brother Charlie bleeding in a ditch while he ran for his life. His fingers found the edge of the cloth and pulled it back just an inch. A child's face stared up at him, maybe 2 years old, with dark hair and features that could be Mexican or maybe Apache. The boy was alive, breathing softly, but his skin held an unnatural pallor that spoke of sickness or exhaustion. More troubling was the small Union cavalry jacket that had been tailored to fit his tiny frame, complete with brass buttons that caught the lamplight. Samuel's throat went dry. He'd heard the stories whispered in saloons from here to Santa Fe. Colonel Morrison's son, kidnapped during the Apache raids last spring, the boy the whole territorial government was looking for, the child worth $5,000 to whoever brought him home. The woman's eyes snapped open, catching him with the cloth pulled back. "You saw." Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. "Ma'am, his name is Thomas," she said, sitting up slowly, never loosening her grip on the boy. "Father thinks he's dead. Better that way." Samuel backed away from the bed, his mind racing. "You stole him." "I saved him." Her voice turned fierce, protective. "You think Colonel Morrison gives a damn about this child? He's got 3 sons by his wife in Boston. This one's just evidence of what he did to my sister." The implications hit Samuel like a physical blow. He'd heard about Morrison, a career soldier who'd made his reputation fighting Indians, taking what he wanted from the settlements he was supposed to protect. If this woman was telling the truth, "They'll hang you," he said quietly. "They'll hang us both if they find him here." She nodded, tears streaming down her fever-bright cheeks. "I know, but I can't let him go back to that man. Thomas deserves better than being raised by the devil who killed his mother." Outside, the distant sound of hoofbeats echoed across the valley, multiple riders moving fast. The woman went rigid, clutching the child closer. "They found me," she whispered. The hoofbeats grew louder, accompanied by the jingle of spurs and the creak of leather that meant armed men. Samuel moved to his window, pushing aside the curtain just enough to see into his yard. 6 riders sat their horses in the pale moonlight, all wearing the blue of the territorial cavalry. At their head sat a man Samuel recognized from wanted posters and whispered stories, Colonel James Morrison himself. Hawthorne, Morrison's voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. We know you're harboring a fugitive. Send out the woman and the boy, and we'll overlook your part in this. Samuel felt the woman's presence behind him before she spoke. She'd wrapped the child in a blanket, but Thomas was awake now, dark eyes wide with the kind of fear that came from understanding more than a 2-year-old should. There's a root cellar, Samuel whispered, without turning around. Behind the kitchen, under the loose boards. You can... No. Her voice was steady now, resigned. I'm done running, but Thomas... She looked down at the boy, then back at Samuel. He's innocent in all this. Whatever happens to me, don't let Morrison take him back to that life. Morrison's voice came again, harder this time. We know she's here, Hawthorne. Her horse left tracks right to your door. You've got 60 seconds to produce her, or we come in shooting. Samuel closed his eyes, feeling the weight of another impossible choice. During the war, he'd faced 100 such moments, times when doing the right thing meant certain death, when survival demanded sacrificing someone else. He'd chosen wrong before, and Charlie had paid the price. There's another way, he said suddenly, an idea forming. The back trail, through Devil's Canyon. It's treacherous in the dark, but if you could make it to the mining camp at Silver Creek, they'll catch me before I'm halfway there. She shook her head. And Thomas is too sick for that kind of ride. Not you, Samuel said, turning to face her fully. Me. The woman's eyes widened. You don't understand what you're saying. They'll shoot you on sight if you run. Maybe. Samuel reached for his gun belt, hanging on the bedpost. Or maybe they'll be so busy chasing me, they won't think to search the house properly. Outside, Morrison's voice rose to a shout. Time's up, Hawthorne! The front door exploded inward in a shower of splinters. Samuel spun toward the woman, his hands already moving. The cellar! Now! But instead of running, she pressed something into his palm. A small locket, tarnished silver with a crack down the middle. My sister's, she whispered. If something happens to me, make sure Thomas knows where he came from. Make sure he knows he was loved. The locket was warm from her touch, and for a moment Samuel saw not a stranger, but someone who reminded him of his own mother. Fierce, protective, willing to die, for what mattered. He closed his fingers around the keepsake, feeling its weight like a promise. What's your name? He asked. Elena Vasquez. She lifted Thomas, who wrapped his small arms around her neck. And I need you to know, whatever story they tell about me, whatever lies Morrison spreads, I'm not a killer. I just couldn't let him hurt this boy anymore. Heavy boots thundered across Samuel's front porch. Morrison's voice boomed through the shattered doorway. Search every room. And if that woman's harmed my son, I'll see her hang from the nearest tree. Elena's face went pale at the word son. He still claims him, she whispered bitterly, even after everything. Samuel heard his furniture being overturned in the next room, his few possessions scattered and broken as the soldiers tore through his home. In moments they had reached the bedroom, and all of this would be over. He looked down at Thomas, who was studying his face with solemn, intelligent eyes. The boy reached out one small hand and touched Samuel's cheek, as if offering comfort instead of seeking it. In that gesture, Samuel saw something he'd lost years ago, the possibility of redemption, of choosing right instead of easy. Elena, he said quietly, take him to the cellar. When you hear gunshots, wait 10 minutes, then ride hard for Silver Creek. There's a mine foreman there named Dutch Patterson. Tell him Samuel Hawthorne sent you. He'll help you disappear. She shook her head. You can't. Yes, I can. Samuel checked his revolver, surprised to find his hands steady for the first time in years. I've been running from Gettysburg for 5 years. Maybe it's time I stopped. Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. As she turned toward the hidden door, Thomas looked back over her shoulder and gave Samuel a small wave. Innocent, trusting, heartbreaking. The bedroom door burst open, and Samuel stepped forward to meet his fate. Colonel Morrison filled the doorway like a thundercloud, his face twisted, hitting with rage and something darker, fear that his secrets might finally see daylight. Behind him, 2 soldiers raised their rifles, fingers tight on triggers. Where is she, Hawthorne? Samuel spread his hands, letting them see he wasn't drawing. Don't know what you're talking about, Colonel. Morrison's backhand caught him across the jaw, splitting his lip. Don't lie to me. We followed her tracks right to your door. The woman who stole my son. Where is she? Your son? Samuel spat blood onto his own floor. Funny way to talk about a boy you never acknowledged. What's his real name, Colonel? Not the one you put on your reports, but the one his mother whispered when you had her killed? The color drained from Morrison's face. For a moment, the mask of righteous authority slipped, revealing the coward underneath. You don't know what you're talking about. Elena told me everything. Samuel took a step forward, ignoring the rifles trained on his chest. How you murdered her sister to cover up your shame. How you were planning to sell that boy to hide the evidence. How many other women, Colonel? How many other children? Morrison's hand dropped to his sidearm. You're going to hang for harboring a kidnapper. Maybe, but first, you're going to explain to your men why you're so desperate to get your hands on a child you've never claimed. Samuel's voice carried across the small room, loud enough for every soldier to hear. Tell them why a 2-year-old is worth chasing across 3 territories. Tell them what really happened to Maria Vasquez. He saw doubt flicker in the soldiers' eyes, questions they'd never thought to ask beginning to surface. Morrison saw it too, and his desperation turned murderous. The colonel drew his pistol, but Samuel was already moving. Years of guilt had made him slow, but facing the truth had made him fast again. His shot took Morrison in the shoulder, spinning the bigger man around. The soldiers hesitated, suddenly uncertain whose orders to follow. Stand down, Samuel barked with the authority he'd once carried as a Confederate lieutenant. Your colonel's under arrest for murder and conspiracy. In the confusion that followed, soldiers shouting, Morrison screaming about insubordination, horses rearing in the yard, Samuel heard the soft sound of the cellar door closing. Elena and Thomas were gone, vanishing into the desert night like smoke on the wind. By the time the territorial marshal arrived 3 days later, Morrison was in chains and his men were talking. The investigation that followed would uncover a web of corruption and violence stretching back years. Elena Vasquez was cleared of all charges. Her actions ruled justified defense of an endangered child. Samuel never saw her again, but sometimes, when the wind was right and the desert sang its lonely song, he thought he heard the echo of a child's laughter carried on the breeze. He kept Elena's locket on his mantelpiece, next to a letter that arrived each Christmas, always unsigned, but carrying news of a boy growing strong and free in California, learning to read and write in a place where his mixed heritage was a source of pride rather than shame. Years later, when Samuel was old and his hands shook too much to work cattle, a young man would ride up to his door. Dark-haired and serious, wearing the badge of a deputy sheriff, he would introduce himself as Thomas Patterson and ask if Samuel remembered a woman named Elena. Samuel would smile then, feeling the weight of old guilt finally lift from his shoulders, and invite the boy, now a man, inside to hear the whole story of the night his real life began. Stories like this aren't just told, they're felt. If you felt it too, subscribe and stay with us.